Hi guys, Jangro here, and welcome to episode 19 of this Valhelsia Enhanced Vanilla Hardcore playthrough. In this episode, we are going to take a look at fluids with AE2 Applied Energistics and in combination with Tech Reborn. Tech Reborn brings a whole bunch of its own fluid dynamics into the mod pack. So we're going to take a look at the black magic voodoo that is behind dealing with fluids. So stick around. Okay, so if you've played Applied Energistics before, but not recently, or if you're coming from Tech Reborn, there's some differences. With the old Applied Energistics, there were separate fluid terminals, import, export buses, level emitters. There's most of the stuff has been combined. So there's only a few things that are fluid specific things now in Applied Energistics. There's a P2P tunnel, which we're not going to talk about today, any of the P2P stuff. But otherwise, it's pretty much just fluid storage cells you need. There's all the other things have just combined fluid into them. So you can see I've got water and lava right here in my terminal. We can filter the types and show fluids only, and you can see all the different fluids I have stored in the terminal. Now, fluids are pretty easy to deal with manually. You just take a bucket and left click, and then you can right click to store it again. So you can grab a bucket of lava, right click to store it, bucket of compressed air, which is kind of silly, but there you go. And the same thing with cells. Tech Reborn brings empty cells to the mix here, which are basically buckets, but they're stackable buckets. So you see I have 3 silicon cells with silicon in them, and we can just right click to store those. So cells are really cool. You should use cells instead of buckets when you're dealing with fluids manually, because you can stack them. If we get 8 buckets of water, it's going to take up 8 slots in our inventory. Okay, let's take a look next at how we can do some autocrafting with fluids that are stored in our ME network. And let's make something with water. So we get lots of it. Okay, let's do something with Farmer's Delight. Let's make egg sandwiches, which is made with bread and 2 fried eggs, which we have a ton of fried eggs, and these are better than just regular cooked meat. Okay, so if we go up into our encoding terminal and make an egg sandwich pattern, and now the egg sandwich, we need fried eggs. So we'll make a fried egg pattern. That's going to go in the smelter. And we also need bread. And instead of just the regular 3 wheats for 1 bread, we are going to use wheat dough, which is 1 bread per wheat dough. Also a smelter recipe. And so the wheat dough is a water bucket and 3 wheat. So here's the fluid part. Now we can't just put water in here. If we take this water bucket out, turn to bread, but we can't just right click here to set water in this recipe. And we can make a processing pattern out of it, because we can put water in a processing pattern, but we have nothing to process that in. It won't work in an assembler. So it needs a bucket. And likewise, there are lots of recipes that need cells. So we need to get fluid into buckets and cells to work in these recipes. So here is our pattern that's a crafting pattern. Let's separate our crafting pattern for the egg sandwich and the wheat dough, processing patterns for those. And now we need to make buckets. Now, in order to make a bucket, likewise, we can't just put water and an empty bucket over here in this side. We have to fill a bucket with water. How do we do that? We do that with a tank. So we'll make a pattern. We're going to have to do this pattern manually. So we have water. It has to be a processing pattern. We can put water in a processing pattern by right-clicking to set water there. And a bucket, an empty bucket, which we can just drag down in here. And that's going to give us a water bucket. And now we have a pattern for a water bucket. And that's going to go into, right over here, we have a basic tank unit, which if it's not empty, if it has something in it, you put a bucket in it and it fills the bucket and spits it out. So we're going to hand to this tank unit 1 bucket of water and an empty bucket, and it's going to give us a filled bucket of water. And this is all done with the pattern provider. So I put this water bucket pattern in here, and now we can make water buckets. So this tank can be used for any fluids. It's not going to hold any fluids. We're going to hand it just enough to make the cell or the bucket that we need. So now if we put the other patterns into the places they go. So we've got these 2 crafting patterns. Well, let's get the furnaces first. So bread from wheat and fried egg from egg. That's how we make those. And now if we go down to our molecular assemblers, we can put these 2 patterns. And now we can make egg sandwiches. We've got plenty of fried eggs already, so we're never going to need to cook those. But if let's just craft like 100 egg sandwiches. We have enough stuff. Yep, we're going to be crafting 34 water buckets, but it's going to keep using this 1 bucket. So it's not going to make 34 buckets, which is nice. But it's going to use 34 waters. It's going to make all this dough. Hit start. And we can go over here and watch this tank do its thing. It's too fast to see the bucket come in, but you can see it spinning. Oh, there's one. And we can see our egg sandwiches filling up here. All right, so there is how you do fluid crafting and auto crafting with Applied Energistics. Before we go on to the next step, let's go take a quick look down here. Just feel like we should cover this. Here's where we have our cells. We've got 2 fluid storage cells, and they are both full of the types of fluids they can hold. And we have another fluid storage cell up here, way behind our lava storage, and that's holding 1 of the 5 types. And because this is being treated as storage, this ME chest over here, we can put 4 more fluids in there. So that'll work as part of our fluid storage. So no matter how big of a fluid storage cell that you make, they each can only hold 5 different types of fluid. So that's important to remember. So we're going to craft a few more of these. And we can get them into our system. And we've got another 64K one here as well. So while those are crafting, let's go on to the next thing, which is how do we get fluids from buckets and cells automatically into our storage network? Now, lots of recipes, especially in Tech Reborn, have, no matter what you're making, and you end up with a bunch of fluids in cells. And you can just keep these cells in your network like this. I've got 16 sodium cells and 6 compressed air cells and 6 helium-3 cells and 3 60K helium coolant cells, etc. And we can just pick these up and right click like this. Now that's tedious, of course. We should be able to automate this. Now we can, just the same way that we put fluid into cells and into buckets, we can take fluid out of cells and buckets by sending full cells into a tank. And we can set up another tank with an export bus that pulls out cells that we filter into the export bus. So we could put, sulfur cell, silicon cell as the input, as a filter on the export bus to go into a chest. And then it will empty the fluid into itself. And then you put an import bus on the tank to pull the fluids and the empty cells out of the tank. And that would be a simple solution. However, it is limiting in that you can never store full cells of those types in your network. So, because they'll always get sucked in to that tank and emptied. So I created this kind of subnetwork system here that is basically a cell and bucket emptier. Here is that tank unit that I was talking about, and it has an import bus and an export bus on it. So it pulls stuff into it, empties them out, and the empty cells get imported back into this subnetwork into a ME chest that has item storage in it. And then the fluids get pulled into this ME chest that has fluid storage in it. And then those get pulled out in front with this export bus into an interface that goes back into the main network. There's a storage bus on here that whenever you put a bucket or a cell with a matching type of fluid in it, it will get stored in here, converted, and spit back out. So with this system, it's you can configure which types of cells you want to empty automatically by putting them in the storage bus as a filter. So right now I've got this sodium cell as a filter right now. So whenever I put sodium cells into the network, they are going to end up in this storage, and they're not actually going to get stored here. They're going to get processed, split up, and their cells and silicon fluid is going to go back. It's going to get separated and then put back into the network. So as long as I put cells in here, so let's do it with a water cell. So we put a water cell right here. Now, whenever a new water cell goes into the system, whether it's the output of a craft or I do it manually, it's going to get stored here in the system thanks to the storage bus. The storage bus has a higher priority than our network does. So things are going to go, water cells are always going to go here first. We put a water cell in, it ends up getting pulled into this basic tank unit. We also need to put a water cell filter on this. We need capacity cards to do that. So let's make a couple capacity cards. And so we put these capacity cards on here. Now we can put 9 things on here. So if we put water cell on here, now water cells and silicon will get processed by this system. And we need one more filter right here, which is to tell it to pull water out. And I need to use a bucket for this. So I right click with a water bucket. So this export bus will pull the fluids and the empty cells out of these chests and back into the network. So now if I make some water cells, I've already got one here. It's not going to pull this in because it's already in the network. But if I take it out and put it back in, it's going to empty it. And we're going to see this turn into 5501 as soon as that tank processes that water. I don't have any acceleration cards, so the input and output of that tank is going to be pretty slow. There it is. Okay, so if we get a bunch of empty cells and fill them with water. So there's 10 now. And we just put them into, let's filter this so we can see what's happening. And if we put these 10 cells in here, they all get pulled out. They get stored in this network over here. And they get dumped in, they're getting dumped into this tank. They're getting emptied. These ME chests are here as buffers because import buses need storage to work properly. It just can't go from an import bus straight to an export bus. So these have to be here to kind of just be in the middle. So they're very small. There's small storage cells in there. And we should be able to see now that our water, you can see it's going up 3, 5. Okay, so as we accumulate different types of cells in our network, we can add them to our system over there to empty them out automatically, so they don't just use up a bunch of cells. Now you can see here that I've got 16 sodium cells in the network. And the last thing I want to show you is the main reason why I did this as a separate system is I've got this interface here that keeps minimum number of items in the network. And this one has a higher priority than this network over here, so that if I take these cells out, it's going to refill it. And they're going to go here first instead of into the emptying system. So I can keep taking out sodium cells and they're just going to get refilled. So this allows us to automatically keep a minimum stock of fluid cells and even buckets. We could put, we could always make sure we have 10 buckets. That's important to speed up recipes. Sometimes to make a certain type of fluid, it takes a lot of processing. And if we're just constantly emptying those and don't have a small store of these items, things will just take longer. And so that is done simply with an interface with a storage bus on it and another connection to it. So it kind of creates this storage, it treats this as storage and maintains this minimum number of things in here. Let's keep minimum number of, we can only keep a minimum of a stack of what you can stack. So since water buckets aren't stackable, all we can do is keep a single bucket in here. But this will always keep a water bucket crafted. So we'll always have a water bucket available to us. We can just watch that happen. Take that out. There's another one. And if we take that out, there's another one. And if we put all these sodium cells back in, those are going to get emptied because we already have the minimum 16 over there. Okay, if we're being thorough, let's head down and see where our water is coming from. We talked about this in a previous episode, but we've got an infinite water supply getting pulled into a drain, into a tank, which has an import bus, which gets pulled into our network. And we have a level emitter on here that has 5,500 buckets configured for water. So if the levels get below 5,500, this level emitter will turn on, which will turn on this toggle bus and power this little small network here and pull more water buckets out until it gets up to 5,500 buckets. That's why we saw 5,500 in our inventory before. Now, finally, in our industrial grinder, we've got water and we've got mercury. We need a sodium persulfate grinder as well. I'm not sure where I'm going to tuck that, maybe right there. But let's go through the process one final time and make sodium persulfate on demand. So to do that, we need to make some patterns. So sodium persulfate is made in the chemical reactor with sodium sulfide and the compressed air cells. So if we make a pattern for this, that's going to go in the chemical reactor. And we're going to need sodium sulfide, which is also a chemical reactor recipe with sodium and sulfur. I think I've already got patterns for those. And a compressed air cell, which is easy. That's just an empty cell in a compressor. So these are chemical reactor. This is compressor. And I think I've got sodium and sulfur patterns already. So now if we put these, this one goes in the compressor and these two go in our chemical reactor. And now we can just make sodium persulfate. So we have our pattern here, our crafting pattern. For now, let's just make one. And it's going to use all the stuff. And it's going to end up here. Oh, it makes two. So we just need one of these because we need to configure our fluid extraction system. So we need on our storage bus, we need a cell. On the export bus down here on the tank, we need the cell, left click. And on this export bus, we need the fluid. So we right click with the cell. And now when we put this cell back in, let's take this one out. So now there's none in here. And we put these two in here. They're not going to show up here. They're going to go and get emptied. And we're going to end up seeing sodium. There they are. And now we can just fill up the inventory when we need it by crafting some sodium persulfate cells, and it's going to create sodium persulfate. And here they come. 20 more. Did I do 21, which caused 22 to be made because they are made in pairs? And there you go. Now we've got sodium persulfate for our industrial grinder, and we can process more ores more efficiently. All right, I think that's going to do it for this episode. I went into a lot more detail than I expected, but fluid processing with autocrafting and systems like Applied Energistics can get confusing. So I hope this was useful. If you do, please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.